Good morning, everyone. I think we'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning to talk about wider access to the balancing mechanism through virtual lead parties, or VLPs. Warm welcome to our energy partners, industry colleagues, and other aggregators for joining us. A few points of housekeeping before we begin. You should all be on mute, but if you could please also ensure that you have muted yourself, just to keep background noise to a minimum, that would be much appreciated. We are recording this event, so video and the slides will be made available in the coming days. To make some introductions as to who is on the line, I'm Andrew Langlands, Account Manager at Flexitricity, and I'm going to be running you through the slides this morning. We also have Flexitricity's founder and Chief Strategy Officer, Dr. Alastair Martin, and our Head of Regulation, Claire Addison. Please feel free to submit questions as we go. Alastair and Claire will be addressing those at the end. We have a rather large number of participants on the webinar this morning, so please try to keep questions as succinct as possible so we can try to answer as many of those as we can at the end from as many different participants as possible. So apologies in advance if we don't get through everything at the end. In order to submit your question, please go to the panel on the right-hand side and go to the Q&A function, and you should have a drop-down menu that says send to all panelists, and that should ensure that any questions that come through will be sent to or picked up by one of us. So to give a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today, first of all, we'll look at some of the significant market changes that have happened and are happening, including, of course, wider access to the balancing mechanism. I'm sure many of you are already aware what the balancing mechanism is, but I thought it would be useful to have a quick summary again and how it differs to other balancing services such as short-term operating reserve. We'll then go into the wider access to the balancing mechanism, which is enabled through the introduction of virtual lead parties. And we'll also touch on P375, which is a code modification raised by Flexitricity to make metering of assets in the balancing mechanism more accurate. Finally, we'll have a look at the differences between accessing the balancing mechanism via Flexitricity as your energy supplier, our Flex Plus service, or as your virtual lead party. And then we'll finish with kind of concluding thoughts and questions at the end. So a reminder to those that have just joined us that questions can be submitted throughout the webinar. Go to the panel on the right-hand side, Q&A, send to all panelists, and that will ensure that one of us picks up the questions as we go. So to rewind slightly, this is the slide where we left off from our short-term operating reserve webinar back in November 2018. This covered a number of different things, which we won't go into detail on today, but things such as how the system and balance price is calculated and applied to non-balancing mechanism store, as well as the medium combustion plant directive and when unabated assets would need to come out of the likes of short-term operating reserve. If you wish to delve into the details of that, the link to our YouTube channel is at the top of the slide now, so please feel free to check out that webinar. But I'm going to draw your attention to the things highlighted in purple here, which we'll go into to give a bit of context for how flexibility services have evolved towards the tail end of last year and what that means now and in the future. So to define some of these acronyms, ASDP is National Grid's new Ancillary Services Dispatch Platform, also known as Platform for Ancillary Services, or PAS. And this is the new platform that National Grid is using for both declaring availability for and dispatching of ancillary services such as short-term operating reserve. Flexitricity is now connected to ASDP and is one of the first aggregators to be dispatching via the platform. And ASDP was launched in line with the conclusion of National Grid's System Needs and Product Strategy, or SNAPS, process. To give a bit of context to that, the system's evolving with larger fossil plant being displaced by lower carbon embedded generation. So SNAPS, very much as it says on the tin, was set up to review the needs of this evolving system with a view to future-proofing the suite of ancillary services that National Grid procures to meet those needs. And as a result of the SNAPS process, we have seen the trial launch of 2 new frequency response services, with more to follow in the coming months, with reserve services such as short-term operating reserve to be addressed later this year. One thing is for certain, however, we're moving closer to real-time procurement of flexibility. Both the frequency response trials are tendered a week ahead, as opposed to FFR, which is currently tendered a month ahead, with talk of possible day-ahead procurement in the future. The European Electricity Balancing Guidelines, or EBGL, should have seen the launch of the TransEuropean Replacement Reserve Exchange, or TER, towards the tail end of last year. And TER would introduce a European marketplace for National Grid to trade reserve power with transmission system operators on the continent, although this has now been pushed back into the summer of this year. And that kind of brings us up to speed to the present day and wider access to the balancing mechanism. Participation in the balancing mechanism will in turn allow participation in TER when it launches, but the balancing mechanism will still prove to be more important as a standalone activity even when TER launches. So lots of change to flexibility services over the past year, and we're entering 2020 with a flexibility superhighway of options in front of us. And to extend that analogy a bit too far, the big question is, which lane should I choose to return the greatest value per megawatt of flexibility as we move into this year? So to go through these points one by one, the balancing mechanism is one of the most important tools that National Grid has at its disposal for balancing the GB electricity system. And so wider access to this market presents a huge opportunity for all forms of flexibility. The BM has traditionally been the playground of large power stations and licensed generators, with aggregators such as Flexitricity crowbarring this open to customers via our energy supply service. We've been dispatching assets in the BM since October 2018, and we're now very much geared up for this market opening up to all shapes and sizes of flexibility. But crucially, agility to move between different services and balancing markets is also going to be a big form of optimization for flexibility. And this is why Flexitricity has taken steps over the last 12 to 18 months to ensure we're in the best position to provide that agility and flexibility optimization service for our energy partners. As I mentioned before, we're seeing the outcomes of the SNAPS process moving us to closer to real-time procurement of ancillary services and shortened flexibility procurement cycles for currently frequency response, but in future the likes of short-term operating reserve. And this will allow Flexitricity to determine whether an asset should be participating in the balancing mechanism or should be moving into reserve services, given the value on offer in each market. And this also includes bidding capacity into TER when it launches. When National Grid sells power to TSOs on the continent, it needs assets to be available to deliver that power. And so access through the balancing mechanism should allow participation in the likes of TER. Distribution network operators are also picking up pace in terms of launch of flexibility services as they make their transition from distribution network operators to distribution system operators, or DSOs. And we've already seen the likes of UKPN and WPD launch new flexibility tenders this year. A lot of these services will commit you to participate in a specific service at a specific time, to overcome a locational constraint. So when considering prices to bid into DSO tenders, one thing that we'll certainly need to consider is the opportunity cost of coming out of real-time services elsewhere. However, and if any of you were at Power Responsive last week, you'll have heard from the likes of the Open Networks Forum, which is working on better rules of engagement between flexibility services through the ESO, National Grid, and DSO flexibility, which will hopefully allow for better stacking of these services in future. Finally, you'll note that Triad Management is shown sitting at the side of the roads with a flat tyre from 2021 onwards. A big thank you to everyone that responded to our energy partner survey at the tail end of last year. It wasn't a surprise to see many responses highlighted the outcome of Ofgem's targeted charging review as one of their leading concerns. The targeted charging review will start to impact Triad benefits from April 2021, although there may still be some Triad benefit in the south. And I must stress that this is coming in from April 2021, meaning Triads are still valuable this year and next winter, and we are, of course, in the midst of Triad season. And based on initial data so far, I think we're looking good to maintain our 100% records of hitting all 3 Triad peaks, but I suspect there will be a little bit more running this week. However, I must also stress that the future loss of Triad benefit only underlines the importance of being able to be agile across these different flexibility markets. The loss of a fixed Triad benefit is being replaced with a more market-driven approach of run when the system needs it. And this is especially pertinent when you consider the ongoing decarbonisation of the grid and the growth of intermittent renewable output. So the decline of Triads therefore emphasises the importance of wider access to the balancing mechanism, creating opportunity for flexible distributed resources as value shifts elsewhere. And I must also stress that determining shifting value is very much an iterative process where Flexitricity earns its keep as a route to market and optimizer for your flexible assets. We're constantly evaluating opportunities across these different flexibility markets using both machine learning algorithms and human beings on our trading and ops desks. So to go into wider balancing mechanism access, first of all, we'll have a quick reminder of what the balancing mechanism actually is, although I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this. You or your energy supplier can fix electricity prices through the wholesale market on the curve, then perhaps refine that position day ahead or intraday. Then 1 hour ahead of a specific settlement period, suppliers and generators must submit physical notifications to National Grid. And this is known as gate closure and gives National Grid a view of all expected generation and all expected demand on the system for that specific settlement period. So in the example on the slide, gate closure for the 1 to 1:30 p.m. settlement period is at 12 p.m. For the 60 to 90 minute window after gate closure, National Grid ESO is then tasked with matching generation with demand, and they do this through the balancing mechanism. Participants in the BM can post offers to generate more or consume less, or bids to generate less or consume more. For example, CHP or a gas engine could post an offer to start running or a bid to turn off if it's already running. Batteries can post offers to push power out and bids to charge up, and flexible loads can post offers to stop consuming power or bids to consume more power. Going back to the example on the slide, at 12 p.m, National Grid ESO will have a view of all bid and offer prices from BM participants, as well as physical notifications from generators and energy suppliers, which tell grids expected generation and expected demand on the system. National Grid ESO identifies mismatches in generation and demand and issues bid offer acceptances to BM participants to balance the system. And in the example on the graph, a site may have 10 megawatts of capacity, 5 megawatts is traded to run, and the other 5 is not running. Site can post an offer to run the spare capacity and a bid to turn off the capacity that is already running. So that would be an example with gas engines. It could be a battery sitting at 50% state of charge, but with wider access to the balancing mechanism, as we'll go into details in a moment, it could be any size and type of flexibility in future, such as electric vehicle chargers, or even flexible load from refrigeration or water pumping or anything along those lines. During the settlement period, National Grid ESO then may accept an offer for the additional 5 megawatts of generation to come on in order to balance the system. The BM is a 24/7, 365 market with an average of over 3,000 trade issued each day. Using both machine learning algorithms and our analysts on our optimization and operations desk, Flexitricity dynamically optimizes both bid and offer prices, settlement period to settlement period, in order to maximize potential returns for our energy partners. Balancing services such as short-term operating reserve are contracted ahead to ensure that flexibility is held in reserve should demand be greater or generation less than forecast. So the likes of store is a service where capacity is held in reserve in case it's needed. Balancing mechanism is a much more dynamic real-time market used for balancing the system. So who is the balancing mechanism currently open to? First of all, licensed generators can access the balancing mechanism, although there are a number of obligations that must be met first, such as the ability to dispatch the asset when called upon by grid, and also set up flows to ensure that bid and offer prices are going through to National Grid. Energy suppliers can also take sites into the BM. When becoming the energy supplier to a site, the supplier becomes the balancing responsible party for that site's MPANs. This, in essence, means that the supplier is responsible for settlement of power flows through those MPANs or settlement meters. Each supplier has 14 base balancing mechanism units, or BMUs, which tie up with DNO boundaries, or GSP groups. And I mentioned earlier that at gate closure, National Grid has a view of all expected generation and all expected demand on the system at gate closure. This is reported to Grid through these BMUs, with the base BMU giving National Grid an aggregated total of all the expected power flows through MPANs that are registered in that base BMU. So for a lot of energy suppliers, base BMUs is all they will ever use, as they're only used to report power flows through the meter, with no access to the balancing mechanism for these sites. Instead, a supplier can register MPANs in an additional BMU. As well as reporting the expected power flow through those MPANs, the supplier can also submit bids and offers into the balancing mechanism to vary that power flow. To give a practical example, a customer may have two sites, one that has no flexibility and the other with flexibility. The site with no flexibility will sit in the base BMU, not participating in the BM, but power flows reported through to National Grid to give an indication of demand at that site. The site with flexibility will sit in the additional BMU, allowing Flexitricity to report on expected power flows, but also post bid and offers into the BM within a parameters agreed by site to vary that power flow through the meter. Flexitricity has been participating in the BM with licensed generators and through our energy supply proposition Flex Plus since October 2018. We were one of the first aggregators to enter the balancing mechanism, and we were the first aggregator to take a behind-the-meter asset into the BM. Now, though, the introduction of virtual lead parties will allow any source of flexibility to enter the BM, meaning a partner like Flexitricity can optimize your flexibility in the BM without making Flexitricity your energy supplier, although that is, of course, still an option. And this wider access to one of National Grid's most important balancing tools represents a huge opportunity for all kinds of flexibility. To do this, your energy supplier will continue to register your site's MPANs in their base BMUs, reporting expected power flows through those meters to National Grid. A virtual lead party can register secondary BMUs and post bids and offers into the balancing mechanism for any flexibility behind those MPANs. As well as posting bids and offers through the secondary BMU, if the flexibility is called upon to deliver a BM action, the virtual lead party also must report the effect that delivery will have on the site's MPANs. And Flexitricity is currently in the process of registering as a virtual lead party, with energy partners potentially able to declare availability for the BM through secondary BMUs with Flexitricity in the spring. As I mentioned before, Flexitricity has been operational in the BM for nearly 18 months now, with licensed generators and as an energy supplier, with VLP access to the balancing mechanism coming in the next few months. So any of these options are open to you via Flexitricity. I also mentioned earlier that the wider access will open up the balancing mechanism to all shapes and sizes of flexibility. That being said, bid and offer prices submitted into the BM are submitted in tranches of 1 megawatt. Secondary BMUs are also split geographically by DNO region or GSP group. So if your asset is less than 1 megawatt in size, Flexitricity will need to aggregate your asset with other assets in the same GSP group or the same DNO region, thereby overcoming this 1 megawatt threshold and allowing us to take your asset into the balancing mechanism. So that again, that opens up a huge opportunity for any assets that are smaller than 1 megawatt and are currently locked out of being able to participate in the BM. To illustrate a practical example of how VLPs will work, I'll continue using the example from the earlier slide where 5 megawatts of export has been sold through your energy supplier and declared via the base BMU. The virtual lead party through the secondary BMU reports that there's 5 megawatts of generation that can be turned on if it's needed, or 5 megawatts of turn down that is currently running. If National Grid accepts an offer during the settlement period, the aggregator that's looking after the secondary BMU will then dispatch that asset and turn on the 5 megawatts of generation, then reports through the secondary BMU that the MPAN should now see 10 megawatts of export during that BM action. However, if electrical load that is unrelated to that flexibility turns on elsewhere at site, unbeknownst to the virtual lead party, the virtual lead party will be reporting that they are delivering that 5 megawatts of extra generation, but the load that's turned on elsewhere in the site will actually affect that delivery and create imbalance. Whether or not you're actually exposed to that imbalance will, of course, depend on your energy supply contract. In order to tackle this potential issue, Flexitricity raised a code modification change proposal in early 2019 that would simplify the reporting of BM actions through secondary BMUs and ensure more accurate settlement when circumstances such as this arise. I must say, Flexitricity raised, it's Alastair Martin that is the official proposer for this code modification, but it's Alexon that we must credit with all of the hard work in getting this code modification to where it is. So we must say a huge thanks to Alexon for all of their efforts in this so far. And if you wish to read a little bit more about that, then we point you to the Alexon website. That the code modification is P375. It is currently in the assessment phase with implementation expected in summer 2020, subject to regulatory approval. For those that wish to avoid exciting bedtime reading of P375, this diagram should hopefully provide a more simplified summary. As I mentioned earlier, the balancing mechanism, including for secondary BMUs, requires reporting of power flows at the settlement meter. So imbalance could be created by other assets that are not delivering flexibility, turning on and affecting the power flow through the settlement meter. And this could be a particularly complex issue at larger sites where there's maybe water pumps or behind the meter batteries that might be drowned out by the noise of other assets turning on and off at site through the aggregated load at the boundary point. So in the example on the slide, we have two flexible assets behind the meter, a generator or a battery, and a flexible load, as well as an inflexible load. BM metering reported through the settlement meter is therefore an aggregate of all these three inputs. P375, however, allows individual unit metering to be used when reporting BM actions. Thus, we can meter the flexible generation through the flexible load or flexible generation through an asset metering system identifier, AMSID, so that any balancing related services delivered by that flexibility can be separated from other imbalance activities on the site, thereby allowing settlement of the balancing volume to be more accurate. So now I'll move on to the differences between accessing the balancing mechanism via Flexitricity as your energy supplier through our Flex Plus service, or Flexitricity as your virtual lead party through secondary BMUs. The main difference is that Flexitricity's energy supply service gives you access to wholesale electricity markets on the curve up to 2 years ahead, day ahead, or intraday. If you're an industrial and commercial customer, this allows you to manage your own wholesale market strategies and risk up to day ahead via a market access platform. Flexitricity can optimize intraday. If you're a merchant asset, such as the front of the meter gas peaker or energy storage site, Flexitricity can optimize across all of these wholesale markets for you. So whether to go down the Flex Plus route or the virtual lead party route, therefore very much depends on your individual business needs. For example, if you're an organization with a large portfolio of sites, some of which are flexible, others are not, virtual lead parties may be the route to go down, allowing Flexitricity to monetize flexibility at the sites with flexibility. Alternatively, you may already be locked into a long-term fixed or flexible tariff, or you may be happy with the day ahead and intraday optimization that your current energy supplier gives you, but they don't give you any optimization in-gate in the balancing mechanism. Or even your overall business needs might suit a different style of energy supply to Flex Plus. And so for any of these routes, the virtual lead party route may be the more viable option. So now we'll move on to some conclusions before we dive into the Q&A. So the implementation of Ofgem's targeted charging review will see a significant loss of triad benefit from April 2021, but the loss of this fixed benefit will be replaced with a market-driven approach of run when the system needs it, with optimization of assets through closer to real-time procurement of flexibility and agility to move between flexibility markets. Although this isn't from April 2021, this is something we can do now. One of those key markets is, of course, the balancing mechanism, a market which has been traditionally dominated by large power plants and licensed generators, but is now opening up to all shapes and sizes of flexibility, including assets that are less than 1 megawatt in size, although those must be aggregated with other assets by GSP group or DNO area. Wider access therefore presents a huge opportunity for all forms of flexibility, and Flexitricity is in the midst of connecting to EV chargers, flexible loads such as heat pumps. So happy to chat to sites about what this opportunity could mean following the webinar. Flexitricity is in the process of becoming a virtual lead party, and we hope to be one of the first and possibly the first to dispatch assets in the balancing mechanism in this way in the coming months. But the question of whether to access the balancing mechanism via the virtual lead party route or through Flexitricity's energy supply agreement, Flex Plus, depends on your business's energy supply needs. Both remain great options for flexibility. And of course, P375 should be implemented later this year, making settlement of balancing mechanism actions more accurate in future for virtual lead parties. And to finish, Flexitricity has been optimising assets in the balancing mechanism for nearly 18 months. We've been continuously improving our algorithms and our optimisation strategies over this time. Combining this with our industry expertise and our market knowledge, we are ideally positioned to optimise flexibility and maximise returns for our energy partners. And to qualify that statement, our recent energy partner survey revealed 95% were very or extremely satisfied with their overall experience with Flexitricity. So we would be delighted to speak to you about how we can partner with your flexibility in future. Talking of industry expertise and market knowledge, that will lead us on to our Q&A session. We've had lots of questions submitted, so thank you very much for sending those. Please feel free to keep submitting them. The first question, may well be, what is all of this worth? I have to stress that there's so many inputs to our modelling, including the type of asset, whether it's load or a battery or a gas engine, the connection that you have, the available flexibility that the asset might have, where the asset is based, if it's in Scotland or if it's in the southeast, there's totally different modelling parameters. So all of these questions are very site specific, so we cannot give ballpark projections of what it's worth on a public forum such as this. It's a discussion for offline that we're very happy to have as a follow-up to this webinar. So with that, I'm going to hand across to Alastair and to Claire, who are going to start addressing some of the questions that have come through.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's Alastair here. We have quite a few very good questions come in. There's very little overlap between them, so we're going to batter through them because I think that they raise some very important points. I'm going to grab the first two. First one there is about geography, it's about location. A lot of people are aware that National Grid will take some actions in the balancing mechanism based on transmission constraints, so congested transmission network segments. And these get a flag, it's called the SO flag. It's because it was a system operator action to do with managing the electricity system rather than an energy action. So how does this get dealt with in the world of VLPs and aggregators? The simple answer is in exactly the same way. National Grid ESO does have a knowledge of the geographical location of balancing mechanism capacity, whether it's coming from a power station, a virtual lead party, or a supplier through, for example, Flexiticity Plus. So they can see that, and if an asset is in a helpful position in respect of dealing with that constraint, then it's likely to get called first, and potentially it'll be able to command a higher price. If an asset is in the wrong location, so that using it would make the constraint worse, it's not going to get called at all. So that's already the way the balancing mechanism works. There are constraints in respect of how people price on constraints on constraints. Pricing around constraints is affected by rules in the grid code. So there's some limitation on that, but broadly you get more action if you're in the right place. Now, how does National Grid know where something is? Initially, National Grid will have the ability to see at distribution network area level, that is to say, one of the 14 zones, otherwise known as GSP groups. As aggregated groups grow, it will become possible to ascribe capacity to individual grid supply points, or GSPs. And the finer the resolution that you provide to National Grid through your VLP in respect of where your capacity is, the more likely it's going to be for National Grid to be able to single out your asset as being the useful one at that time. So this is an area where aggregation and working together and clubbing together can create additional value. I hope that deals with that one. The second one, which I'll deal with to grab quickly, what are the penalties for failing to deliver a bid or an offer in the balancing mechanism? Two answers. First, if somebody is instructed to deliver energy or to decrease generation or increase consumption, and they don't do so, then they are out of balance. And there is an imbalance. The imbalance process applies to that. So imbalance charges flow in the normal way to somebody who is short, didn't generate enough, consumed too much, or long, generated too much, consumed too little. However, the imbalance prices are calculated at system level and they're the same for everybody. So it is perfectly possible for somebody, for example, to receive a nice high offer price, fail to deliver it, and then get paid, and get paid that nevertheless, but then pay an imbalance price that's lower than the offer price that they earned. The mechanism for dealing with this obvious issue is called non-delivery charges, which essentially means if you made money out of a failure to deliver, then that money is clawed back. And all of this is exactly as the balancing mechanism runs for everybody that's in it today. I'll hand over to Claire, I think, for the next.
Yeah, so we have another question from April 2020 onwards. Does Flexitricity see more value in BM or in store? So my overarching message on that would be that revenue agility is going to be even more important than it is today. And that to maximise value from both of these markets, we expect to see energy partners' assets moving between revenue streams, particularly as more entrants come into each of those revenue streams. So the key thing for me is that BM and store are obviously doing different things for National Grid. BM is a much larger market, it's closer to real time. The value to access and at least the initial number of additional parties accessing through wider access, we think is unlikely to shift the value. And that the reference in the question to April 2020, obviously aware of some of the uncertainties around store going forwards. We still think that store is going to be an important market going forwards. We see that National Grid are needing some forward capacity so that they know their position in advance. And we think that both will be important, as evidenced by, as Andrew mentioned, ASDP being put in place. BM obviously doesn't give that advanced notification for National Grid, so we think that they're both going to have a role. I would emphasise that for energy partners who have non-BM framework agreements, we will still be able to offer store from the 31st of January as planned.
Okay, and the next one I've got here, will BM wider access increase the investment case for behind the meter technologies such as combined heat and power, as they will no longer have to have a generation or supply license? If I can paraphrase that, I think it means that they will no longer have to have that license in order to participate in the balancing mechanism. Yes, that is exactly what the VLP model is intended to do. It's intended to throw the doors to the balancing mechanism wide open. For small embedded generation or for energy networks or for large-scale heat pumps and all these different assets, accessing these markets has been impossible for many years. It is possible now through the direct supply route with Flex Plus, but this VLP model throws it open to everybody. It's money that the CHP or a district energy scheme could not have counted on in the past, and now they can, pretty much no matter who they trade with in respect of gas and electricity.
And the next question on that builds on Alastair's answer. Just to be clear, as a VLP, you could add BM participation to the revenue stack for my assets without me needing to break or adjust my supply contract. And yes, that's exactly right. We would be able, if it wasn't appropriate for you to have Flexitricity as your supplier, to optimise your assets without you having to move away from your existing supplier.
There is another, this is probably the only place where we have overlapping questions in the question stack. And that is whether or not existing suppliers can impede customers' access to BM wider access. Now, this was a hotly debated point in the construction of the VLP model. Basically, the outcome is no. Your supplier cannot block your access to BM wider access. You have the right to do that. They don't even have to know. The virtual lead party has to tell Elexon, who basically keep accounts in the balancing and settlement code. The virtual lead party has to tell Elexon about the volumes of electricity that are transacted by the VLP using that customer's assets. But that information is only available to the supplier at top level. So there could be many virtual lead parties working, and the information comes to the supplier in aggregate form. Having said that, the design of this system left open the question of how suppliers and customers want to contract in respect of this. And there is value in customers and suppliers collaborating and working well together in dealing with these volumes. So essentially, the answer is your supplier cannot prevent you from participating, but a collaborative, cooperative, friendly supplier that is willing to work with the customer and the virtual lead party can create something that creates more benefit for everybody if they do that.
Okay, we have so many questions coming in. Someone saying, by the way, AMSID is such a great idea, not a question, just a comment. Thanks. So to look at a couple of questions. Can you clarify, as a VLP, the asset would not need a generation license? Yes, we can absolutely clarify that. The expectation is, as we outlined in the P375 slide, that this will go all the way down to domestic level. So you would be able to aggregate an electric vehicle, a heat pump, a domestic home under P375 and using VLP. Definitely don't need a generation license.
And a similar tone of question is a very important point. Can we clarify whether it's possible to take flexibility into the balancing mechanism as a VLP before P375 goes live? That is to say, before we have these asset meters accepted as part of the system. Yes, the VLP process works before P375 is done. It just becomes a whole lot more accurate once P375 asset metering is in place.
Can you opt out of the BM if it doesn't provide the value expected? Yes, we can. That's obviously a discussion that we would have with you to understand the constraints that you had and the value expectations. So we would work with you, and that would be an iterative process as value fluctuated in the BM.
Yes, I think I would add to that the BM wider access product is especially suited to customers whose ability to be flexible varies. It is entirely designed around the idea that you turn up in the balancing mechanism with what you've got, half hour by half hour, and if you've got nothing right now, you don't offer it. Or if, for example, you've got the ability to consume more, but not to generate more, or vice versa, then you offer what you have. And this was core to the design and core to the benefit. So if you wake up one morning and you say, I don't want to do any BM for the next 5 days, then you don't, and that's entirely cool. But I'll just grab another question, which I think is quite an interesting point of detail around TER. So where does TER fit in the sequence relative to gate closure and short-term operating reserve and so forth? TER, we see TER as a subset of balancing mechanism wider access. TER is a particular shape of product, essentially 15-minute blocks of energy procured over this central TER system with some IT known as Libra that optimizes across all the participating countries. And the way that TER works, it's a bit of a hybrid between short-term operating reserve and the balancing mechanism. So TER has these fixed chunks of power that are instructed in similar timescales to other balancing mechanism activity, but not right at the wire. So you can't get a 1 minute ahead instruction for TER. You can get a half-hour ahead instruction for TER. Short-term operating reserve is similar but different. It is a reserve product, but it is reserved significantly further ahead, and under the present conditions, up to 2 years ahead. Now, there may be some transformation of store. If TER goes live and picks up steam, then store might decline in importance, in which case TER will be a more important market. So 1 hour ahead in TER and half-hour ahead instructions for 15-minute blocks. Quite rigid. The balancing mechanism, on the other hand, asks you to act right away.
I'll just make a follow-up comment in terms of the future of store. National Grid Power Responsive last week indicated that the evolution of store as a service, they're going to be waiting until later this year before there's any announcements on the potential shake-up of store in line with the SNAPS process. They're waiting to see what the impact of wider access to the balancing mechanism and potentially TER has on reserve markets. So it's probably going to be later this year that we're going to hear more on exactly what store looks like as a service in future.
There's a lot of questions still coming through. I'd just like to pick one particular one up in passing, just to make sure we're doing the list. Do we see a point where National Grid system operator will procure based on kilograms of carbon dioxide, either as well of or instead of pounds per megawatt? I actually don't see that. The policy position for many years has been that it's government's problem to set the cost of carbon, and the National Grid's problem to optimise based on the costs that they see. And the philosophy there is that if high carbon generation is too cheap, government's job is to make it less cheap. Now, that's the model. That there's no obvious sign of that changing. What there is, however, is an absolutely clear intention on the part of National Grid, ESO, to be very, very able and technically capable in absorbing renewables in whatever form they come through, and absorbing the large new nuclear plant at Hinkley. So there is a very strong move towards the enabling of low carbon generation, but it is not National Grid ESO's policy responsibility to ensure that it happens. It is nevertheless happening, and at a rate much faster than I think everybody in the market when we began operations 12 years ago would have expected.
We've got a question here on EVs. So it's a multi-part question, but it basically ends in, as EV numbers rise, what measures are envisaged to ensure that local LV networks are not overloaded by turning on such large loads together? So obviously this is referring to the fact that as a VLP, we will be able to bring electric vehicle fleets into the balancing mechanism. And we are involved in a number of different measures to make sure that that's done safely and appropriately. The British Standards Institute is putting through a performance assurance standard to make sure that anyone who is optimising flexible assets behind the boundary meter is doing so in a controlled way. We're sitting on the steering group for that. I'm also aware of a measure that the DNOs are putting through to ensure that they will be able to essentially have a kill switch if EV charging is going to affect the integrity of the system. And finally, there are different options for how to control the moving peak caused by EVs coming through from Department of Transport, which are looking at phased charging ramp-ups that are longer than the current EV peak that's envisaged from 12 to 4. There's a lot of work going on in this.
I think I would add to that it is perfectly possible to charge an electric vehicle from a 13-amp socket, and there is this is entirely within the householders' rights, and if they are not already one of the relatively small number of elective half-hourly customers, then it costs them nothing to do that. So this is coming down the tracks for the distribution networks anyway, In saying that, I'm hoping that I can answer one of the other questions that's popped up, around what we in Flexitricity propose to do to tackle congestion issues. What we see here is that congestion, whether at distribution or transmission network level, is an area where flexibility at distributed locations and right down from the industrial commercial down into the individual homes is valuable. The flexibility has value because it can deal with congestion without digging up the streets and burying more copper. So we are working as hard as we can with the distribution network operators to move this into reality, get it beyond the trials. The DNOs have always been, we've been working on this for about 10 years. They've been a little bit on the slow side. We are now beginning to see opportunities come forward for flexibility to be offered as an alternative to building new copper.
Can I just make a quick comment on that as well? At the Power Responsive Forum last week, we heard from the project down in Cornwall, the local flexibility project down there, and they're developing a platform that would essentially allow the DNO or National Grid to bid for that flexibility. So whoever has the priority and whoever values that flexibility more can procure that flexibility through the platforms, whether it's National Grid trying to overcome a system constraint or the DNO trying to overcome a locational constraint. Whichever party values that flexibility more will be able to bid for it through the platform that they're developing down there. So that's just one of the projects that is going on through, I think, the Open Network Forum to kind of address that challenge.
So I'm going to answer another question which has come in. I'll just read it out. Does the VLP require any interaction with the DC, the data collector, to do with the meter? Or does Alexon manage the screening out of VLP energy flows via ABSVD? ABSVD, for those who don't know it, is Applicable Balancing Services Volume Data. And to give it its full title, ABSVD Readjustment Methodology. The answer is yes to both of those things. The virtual lead party engages with the metering chain of command, and this allows me to mention one very important point. Metering for asset meters, it will be under a new standard being drawn up by Alexon now. It will be Code of Practice 11. Many people will be familiar with Codes of Practice 1, 2, 3, and 5 for different sizes of metering. 11 covers all of those and right down to domestic level, and it applies metering standards that are right for the size of participating site, to the extent that we believe that it will be possible, in fact quite easy, for organizations such as vehicle charge point manufacturers to have their charge points compliant with the relevant metering codes out of the box. As soon as the shrink wrap is off, that should be compliant. And that is an easy thing to arrange. So what that then creates is a system that can feed data in, and the data will be fed into the data collector, data aggregator route. Those organizations still need to be appointed, and they then feed that information up into settlements. Alexon then it does have the responsibility for sorting out all of those flows. In addition to that, the virtual lead party will still be telling Alexon the volumes of energy instructed and delivered in respect of balancing mechanism actions, but clearly with asset metering in place, it's going to be the same number in those boxes.
I think there's a question that's would be quite a good one to answer about NIV chasing, and we on the Flex Plus versus VLP slide, we had that you wouldn't be able to do NIV chasing through a virtual lead party, and there's a question around why could you not do NIV chasing through a virtual lead party?
Right, I think there's some very important points around NIV chasing and the balancing mechanism generally. So NIV chasing is essentially an alternative to balancing mechanism activity. So it is possible to do NIV chasing with an asset and to do that, even if you have a VLP engaged, but you cannot at the same time offer those volumes into the balancing mechanism. National Grid's ESO's view of the of proper participation in the balancing mechanism is that you should always be declaring accurately what you're going to do for your physical notifications, and then do that unless otherwise instructed. The difference there is a concept called information imbalance, which is intended to capture the issues that the grid control will have if people keep deviating from what they said they were going to do. At the moment, NIF chasing does currently use a loophole there to do with relatively small supplier balancing mechanism units. And one of the things that we are unsure of just now is how long that particular loophole will persist. So it's there now, but it's an alternative to the balancing mechanism. And in a market where distributed resources become ever more important, we actually think that NIF chasing will decline in importance. So in summary, concurrent NIF chasing and balancing mechanism activity is not allowed. You're essentially opting out of the balancing mechanism if you're going to NIF chase, and then your NIF chasing capability depends on how good you are at predicting the very near future with limited information.
Is there any other questions that have not yet been addressed?
Not that I can see, and that very neatly takes us up to the webinar.
Great, yeah. Well, thank you everyone for your attendance. As I mentioned at the outset, we have been recording this, so the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and the slides will be shared to all attendees in the coming days. If you do have any specific questions that you've not submitted, then please do get in touch with myself or anybody else at Flexitricity, and we can see if we can take those discussions offline. And we're very happy to open up dialogue about how wider access to the balancing mechanism offers a huge opportunity for your flexibility. So thanks again for attending, and we shall speak to you all soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.